In the spring of 1741, a series of mysterious fires ignited the streets of New York City. First Fort George, then a string of warehouses, storehouses, and homes. Whispers turned into panic. Who could be set in the city ablaze? Were these merely accidents, or something far more sinister? New York City in the 1740s was a bustling Atlantic port, a growing urban center at the crossroads of commerce, colonial politics, and slavery. Beneath its veneer of prosperity lay a society deeply reliant on and shaped by forced labor. Nearly 20% of New York's population in 1741 was black, most of them enslaved, performing everything from domestic labor to skilled trades. The colonial elite depended on the labor to maintain their wealth and status, even as they feared the very people they subjugated. This demographic imbalance bred tension. The city was rife with social and economic instability. A harsh winter had deepened food scarcity and fanned dissatisfaction. Political instability simmered under the surface as factions struggled for influence. In this atmosphere of fear, even a small disruption could spark chaos, and the fires did exactly that. In March and April of 1741, a series of fires erupted across the city. First, the governor's home at Fort George burned. Then, one by one, buildings throughout the city went up in flames. Storehouses, private homes, commercial buildings. Panic surged. Was the city under attack from within? It wasn't long before cries of conspiracy echoed from the streets to the courtrooms. The city recorder described the suspected plan as a combination of villains, more dangerous, a contrivance than the slaves themselves were capable of. Authorities quickly turned their attention to black New Yorkers, both enslaved and free. But suspicion did not stop there. White tavern keepers, soldiers, a schoolteacher, and even Catholic priests were implicated in the so-called conspiracy. The city's leadership desired to reestablish order quickly and transformed into a campaign of surveillance, arrest, and punishment. Accusations spread like the very fires they feared, and what followed was one of the most notorious episodes of mass hysteria in colonial American history. At the heart of the legal proceedings was Daniel Horstmanden, a man determined not only to uncover a plot, but to prove the legitimacy of elite authority. His journal of the proceedings became the primary source for what we know of these events. But it is far from an objective record. Historian Jill Lepore referred to it as one of the most startling and vexing documents in early American history. It is a vivid account, to be sure, but one shaped by fear, prejudice, and a deep commitment to maintaining the racial and social order of colonial New York. More than 30 fires were blamed on an organized plot. Dozens of enslaved people were arrested, interrogated, and in many cases tortured into confessions. These so-called confessions were used to weave an elaborate narrative of rebellion, secret meetings, coded signals, pacts of loyalty, and plans for mass arson and uprising. Yet when we examine the testimony, much of it details ordinary behavior, gatherings at Houston's Tavern, drinking rum, attending dances, or simply traveling the city. Seen through a different lens, these testimonies reveal a black urban culture striving for autonomy, connection, and joy in the face of relentless oppression. But colonial authorities viewed any unsupervised congregation or sign of independence as a potential rebellion. If we look past the alleged conspiracies, we see black New Yorkers describing ordinary behaviors, drinking, dancing, engaging in commerce. These were then reframed as threats to social order. Why were the fires so quickly blamed on a coordinated black uprising? Well, the answer lies in colonial fear. White New Yorkers were haunted by the memory of the 1712 slave rebellion, in which a small group of enslaved people killed several white colonists. That uprising had prompted harsh laws and restrictions on enslaved people's movements and rights. But those measures hadn't resolved the fundamental tensions. The growing black population in the city, both enslaved and free, remained a symbol of white unease. As historian Eric Plaag explains, the 1741 slave conspiracy occurred in a climate of fear and anxiety. The legal process that unfolded was anything but impartial. Accusations multiplied rapidly. Mary Burton, a young indentured servant working in the household of a tavern keeper, John Hewson, gave testimony that would become central to the trials. Under intense pressure, she implicated dozens of people. Her testimony evolved over time, adding new names and details with each retelling. Whether out of fear, coercion, or a desire to protect herself, Mary Burton's statements fueled the hysteria. At one point, she claimed they talked of burning the fort and the whole town with it. The results were horrific. 30 black men were burned at the stake, 13 were hanged, 4 white people were also executed, including John Hewson and his wife. Over 20 more individuals, black and white, were deported from the colony, never to return. The trials became a spectacle of punishment and a chilling display of state power. Historians still debate whether a coordinated plot actually existed. Jill Lepore concludes that there was no single plot, but rather a series of overlapping grievances and rumors that spiraled into mass panic. Others suggested that while some enslaved people may have discussed resistance, the level of organization and coordination alleged by colonial officials was unlikely. What seemed clear is that the scale of the conspiracy was exaggerated, perhaps even invented, to justify harsh retribution. The 1741 trials weren't just about law enforcement, they were about social control. As Bond argues, they served to reassert white authority over a city increasingly defined by its racial diversity and economic inequality. The elite sought to reinforce boundaries between enslaved and free, black and white, loyal and traitorous. The trials offered a way to cleanse the city of perceived disorder and restore a shaken social hierarchy. In the aftermath, the events of 1741 faded from public memory. They weren't commemorated in monuments or textbooks, yet today historians view the trials as a powerful lens into the fears and mechanisms of colonial rule. The conspiracy trials illustrate how quickly fear can distort justice and how narratives of danger can be constructed to target marginalized communities. The criminalization of ordinary behavior, drinking, gathering, storytelling, served as a warning to black New Yorkers. Even minor acts of independence could be reinterpreted as treason. To claim that black New Yorkers were only victims or violent rebels is to miss the complexity of their lives. As Bond reminds us, we must look beyond exaggerated accounts and see the full spectrum of experience, both resistance and resilience. Whether the plot was real or imagined, the 1741 trials reshaped how black resistance was understood and punished. They laid the groundwork for future laws and social practices that sought to limit black agency in urban spaces. The story also underscores the power of rumor, the ability of unverified claims to reshape policy and justify violence. Today, the 1741 New York slave conspiracy reminds us that fear can warp justice, that ordinary lives, when viewed through the lens of prejudice, can be transformed into existential threats. And that power often lies not in truth, but in the stories a society chooses to believe. As Richard Bond writes, the history of this slave revolt has always been a subject of curiosity. But it is more than a curiosity. It is a cautionary tale, one with profound relevance for any society wrestling with the legacies of inequality, racism, and fear. I'm Dr. Lucas Wilder, and this is History Gone Wilder. I'll see you next time.